Hello, I'm going to be reviewing the CSV boot, Spring Boot application, and let's get this here. Okay, so it's running. I'm going to close all of these and go through one by one. So company controller, I believe, is the... Okay, so list. I would expect list currently to return nothing. So let's see if that works. And I will... Can you get this out of here? Okay, so it's companies / list. Okay, good. Yeah, cool, that's working as I expected. But they're already added. I guess this is because they've been read from, so let's company serviced dot list. Company service. Company list. Okay. Oh, so you populate it by default. Okay. I like that. Dot list. Add company. Company. Ah, you have the request body of company. Good. So that's... Sorry, I'll go through what I think, but I'm just testing everything out to make sure everything's working as I expect, because that kind of fits best with... Okay, so add company. Let's add. Put. Ah, okay, this is the first thing. We don't want to have lists for everything, obviously, so I understand that I see, you've probably added this because you don't want to just have the company name, so what we could do is we could have update, well, you've got update company here, so let's have update, right? Let's just change these a little. I think that makes more sense rather than having all as lists, because delete as list is a little confusing. Delete. And get mapping. Post list should be new. We can new whatever, new company, but for now this will be fine. So we'll get into RESTful at some point, which is more of like a resource. It's more of like a philosophy to developing these controllers, and not specifically for Spring Boot, but more so for HTTP servers, which things are very much determined explicitly of these, and then you input like an ID here, which is referring to the resource. It's like a whole methodology. It's quite interesting and it's quite popular. So that's something we can get into in the future. I'm going to delete these commented out bits just for my clarity of mind. Okay. I was doing add company. So add company, new. New, then say post, and JSON. Greg incorporated. And the company country. Company country, yes. England. I'll put in caps because I don't know if we're still using enums, but I'll put in caps just in case. What do you return? No response. Okay, so that's something we could slightly improve on. No response, which is fine. I mean, it's 200, so we can see it's working. But I saw here that it's just returning void. The issue with returning void is it's kind of difficult for users to know exactly what's happening. So for example, if I know this works, but let me just check if that's added to list actually before I continue. Should be list companies. Yeah, and it's added. Perfect. Very good. Cool. So this is one thing is, for example, this might be working now and that's working great in the happy flow. But for example, if I'm to, A, B, C, D, E, F, 200, still returning 200. So, but I imagine, here, if I go back, yes, it just says null null. So what we would expect is some sort of checking here, and I know I didn't specify this, but right now we will always return a 200 if there's not an error, right? So what we could do is we can change this to like you've done here. We could have a response entity, and then we can validate the company somehow. So if company equals null, or company name get name is empty, then we could say return new response entity, and then we could put in a HTTP status that reflects that something isn't right. So we can say that there's a bad request. This is a very popular one. I think this is 406, and this is 400. 406 is the one we're looking for, which is not acceptable. Ignore that. This is just a kind of way to make this issue go away. And then otherwise we could just do return new response entity. I think you can actually just do response dot build. You can also do that, I think. So those are the different ways of. Let me just do that here. Response entity dot not acceptable is not there. Okay, so that's why we want to use it here, so we can use this not acceptable field. But this is a lot more clear to me than if I then restart this, because APIs often the user doesn't really see what's going on in an API, right? They just see the response they get. And so if we're doing a public-facing API, then we kind of want something a bit clearer to sort of explain what's going on. So go back to here, close this down. We do add company. We get 500 now. Okay, I imagine it's because the validation is not quite correct. The company name is null. And now again, these review changes aren't necessarily things you need to go back and implement. If you want to, maybe it's a good idea, but just kind of to give you an idea what it would look like, how you would do it, and the reason for why, and I'll go into that a bit more once it's actually implemented. So there we go. Now we see a 406, so we can say, oh, okay, it's because I haven't got these correct parameters in here. There we go. Oh, accepted. Okay, that's better. Yeah, so I think that would be a good thing to do here, and then you can add various different ones depending on, or you could have already exist if we want to make sure things are unique, or we could have, and this is just kind of giving a bit more responsive feedback. Sorry, I need to plug my laptop in, it's running out of charge. To kind of what's going on. Okay, I've dwelled on that enough, I think. Moving on. Update company. I'm not going to test these out. I think this is, I'm assuming Maybe they don't work, maybe they do. I'm assuming they work. They seem to, everything makes sense to me that you're passing in. I'll try the delete quickly, I guess I might as well. So what's the company in here? I can check through this by doing our list method. So list, company name, Greg Incorporated. And then delete company. .405, method not allowed. You're quite right. Here we go. And then list. Still here. Because, again, this is another reason, it'd be better if I could have feedback, which it says, like, it could even return a string. Let's quickly do that, give another example. So, quickly change this to response entity. This is going to be string. Then, does this return anything? Delete company, remove if equals company name. Oh, remove if, okay. I'm going to return this. I haven't actually used this method before, but that seems very useful. It seems to delete company, then remove company. Yeah, I could use a ternary operator here, which is basically, it's a way of writing an if statement that's a bit smaller. I wouldn't necessarily say neater, but right now, let's just build. Let's return response entity. Not found. Can I put a string in here? No. Refresh this quickly. It's so nice using your Spring Boot server because things just load instantly. It's like so much quicker. On my version I have to wait, sometimes up to like 30 seconds. It's like you boot it and then it's done. Okay, so Greg Incorporated, 404. Could not find company Greg Incorporated. 404 is usually actually used for not finding the link, but here we can find another one. I think it's usually just a good idea to look through all of the HTTP statuses and see which one is most appropriate. And also we want to make sure, I'll actually make this into a quick little lesson. I know you're probably familiar, but basically codes that start with 200, so 200 to 299 positive. I don't think there is a 299. 300 I think they're just extra information. So there's like 300 HTTP statuses. Just quickly double check this. I don't want to say anything. Yeah, okay, so 300 is about redirection. That's correct. And then 400 is, I think it's like issue on requester's end. So basically issue on the front end or issue on the person, basic. And then 500 is server error or 500 plus. So 400, 499. There's also 100. But for the most part, I'm just going to get rid of redirection because we very rarely use it in these kind of scenarios. So we're focusing on these ones basically. Now there might be some minor exceptions to this, but generally these are accepted. There's an issue with the request for some reason, like your actual request format, and these ones is you send a valid request to the server, but the server has an issue. So for example, 500 is, if there's a null pointer, it will automatically return 500, but there's also like, I think 500 plus HTTP statuses. Yes. Yeah, so there's like not implemented, bad gateway, service unavailable, all of these things where we're basically saying it's not working, the request is fine, it's not your fault, but we want to let you know about that. So in terms of actual code review, I mean, other than these kind of the communication, functionality-wise, it's working really well. So I'm really pleased with that. I actually will just double check that Greg Incorporated is working in its raw format. Could not find company. Oh, I have not added it. Then I list, Greg Incorporated, then I delete, and then I list. Wow, really good. Everything's working really well. So I'm really pleased with that. Let me quickly have a look through service, see if I can find any minor improvements. I'm going to get rid of anything that's commented out because I know you like to work like that, but personally, I do not. I like to have a clean code base. So yeah, that's okay. I'm just correcting things without telling you. That's very bad. Okay, so this is a very minor thing, and this won't make a functional difference for the most part. But what we do is instead of saying array list here, we actually just say list. So when we say list, what we're saying is we actually just want to use the abstract version of a list. So there are multiple types of lists. Just like if you look at Java collections, we have list, and under list, we have an array list, and then we have a linked list. And there are other sorts of lists later on, but for now we just use these. So there's different reasons to use both of these lists. So linked lists are like easier to add an item on the end, but not so great to find the item because you have to look through all of the pointers. And I'm sure you've had linked lists mentioned. If not, let me know. I'll send you a quick link. For the most part, we don't use them. But what we do is when we say something is an array list, we say public, array list get companies. Now, what we're doing here is if in the future we want to change this to a linked list, it's going to be very awkward to do that because then everything will have the type array list, and then that'll be like, whatever. Then the other methods will take array lists, and we don't want this. So what happens here is if now we have, if now we want to change this from array list into a linked list, because we found that our efficiency concerns that linked list would actually work better, what we'd have to do is we'd have to change, okay, this is a linked list, okay, this is a linked list, this needs to be a linked list, this needs to be a linked list, this needs to be a link, and then we'd have to sort of make sure everything's still working as we'd expect it to be working. But what we do is if we just call everything list, this will work for array list, because an array list is a list. So this method accepts array lists because it's a list, right? So this is a sort of the Java abstraction, as I'm sure you're aware. It's always a bit awkward because we haven't gone up from sort of a foundational level. I'm not sure exactly what you're familiar with, but this is an abstraction and it's an interface that both of them inherit from. So you can put a list in here, it's a list, that's fine. You put an array list in, that's fine. You put a linked list in, that's fine. And now, everything's just fine. So if we want to say that companies equals new, equals new array list, string, that's fine. That works. But if we want to say that it's not an array list anymore, it's actually a linked list, that's also fine. And we don't have to actually change any code, because everything is already set up to use that. It's the same with, I think we've used this before, but there's generally when we're talking about collections in Java, we talk about the list, the map, the set. These are like the highest level abstraction. So we don't say hash set, we just say set. Because then if you want to use a tree set or a hash set, we don't have to change any code. We only change it in one place and it already works everywhere else. I will not dwell on that anymore. Cool. Okay, so this is going to just shift this here to list. Oh, but it should specify the, that is my bad, it should still specify the generic. It's very important we keep that generic. There we go, and everything will still be working perfectly fine. Cool, cool, cool. Company name, company new. That's good, but we actually don't need this, I think. So if we look here at, this is fine. I mean, this is completely fine with this put, but I believe in your company new, oh, it's open here. We already have a company name. So this is a little bit redundant to say, to pass both. That's fine. I mean, it's not an issue, but that's just something we could have considered. I'll keep looking through here. This is an array list. Oh, this is actually interesting because this actually, if we look at the method contract of this, already says it returns a list. So now, because we don't have an array list here, we can just do this. And we can just get rid of that little bit of unnecessary code. I will also correct this to England. Obviously, I understand it's not your first language. It is England, rather than England. That's not really a code review. Okay, optionals. Yeah, we'll talk about optionals. I think they're super useful, and I think if you start working with them early, it's a really good kind of paradigm to think about things in. And we'll do that in the call tomorrow. Hopefully we discuss most of this in the call tomorrow, rather than you specifically emailing me questions. We kind of, if you can get everything you want to talk about written down from here, then when we have the call tomorrow, we'll get everything discussed and talked about. I think I'm really happy with this, honestly. Like, this is a sort of a minimal example of a functional Spring Boot server. Everything's sort of working as I expect it to, and from here we can kind of just build upwards. So great job. I'll talk to you tomorrow.